Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Olga Mecking is a writer, journalist, and translator based in the Netherlands. She contributes to the New York Times, The Guardian, the BBC, The Atlantic, and many other publications. In her new book, Niksen, Embracing the Dutch Art of Doing Nothing, Olga shares why ritualistically letting your mind go free and doing nothing is the key to being more productive and happier in life. She is the reporter who made Niksen big, and her New York Times article on the subject was shared over 100,000 times. Since then, she has been interviewed by numerous media on the topic, from written news and blogs to radio shows and podcasts. Olga is also the creator of the blog The European Mama, translator of her father's memoir, One Chance in a Thousand, all about surviving the Holocaust, and the editor of and contributor to the 2014 anthology Dutched Up. Originally from Poland, she now lives with her German husband in the Netherlands. She shares how Niksen can be more approachable than meditation and why doing nothing can actually boost creativity and productivity. Olga Mecking, what an honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's such an honor. I want to start by talking about how you open your book, which is telling us about your most amazing and perfect life. You have everything put together all the time. All your work assignments are done and completed. The house is always clean. The kids behave perfectly every single day. What an amazing life you have.
Oh, I just woke up like that, you know?
Great answer. That's a great answer. I love how you close the book with it as well. I think it's really interesting when we, start to get into, I don't know if I would call your book self-help or not, but we start to get into some of these things to make ourselves better, and we expect everything in our lives to be fixed magically, and that's not often the case, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And this book often kind of promise that, like they make this promise that if you do what I'm telling you to do in this book, your life will be perfect. And that's not how it works. Either, right?
Nope, not at all. I absolutely love your book, and I'm reading it for the second time now because I am not very good at Niksen. Is this something that comes easy to you?
In a way, maybe now not as as easy as it used to be. But yeah, it was like kind of interesting to read about it in a Dutch article and realize, what I've been doing, or I've been calling it maybe daydreaming, or kind of, daydreaming is, I think, the closest to what I was calling it. But then there was this name for it, Niksen, and I just loved it because, it's very practical. You have a whole concept in one word. So in English, you would say to do nothing, right? Which is a whole lot of words, but Niksen is just one word, and it's very, very nice, very handy.
Yeah, I love it. I think my other favorite way to think about it is like nothing-ing. Like if nothing were a verb, that would kind of fit that description. Is that a good way to translate that?
That's exactly the way to translate. And I think it works very well in English with other words. Like you have the word adult, and we've made adulting out of that. So it's kind of, I think English is a language where you can kind of verb everything, turn everything into a verb.
Interesting.
And Dutch as well.
Interesting. You talk a lot about culture in your book, and what do you think it is about our culture, the English-speaking culture, that has a verb do in front of nothing? It's like we can't just be. We always have to be turned on and doing something all the time. What do you think it is about us?
So you mentioned language. I guess it's because English is a Germanic language, and other like German has it as well. They also have it like nichts tun, and tun is do, right? It's to do. So they also have this construction. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. But in other languages you'd have to say it as well. Like in Polish, it would also mean to do nothing. So, like linguistically speaking, of course. But I guess countries like the US or the UK, I've been the ones I've been reading about, I'm always reading how it's like everyone gets burnt out and is stressed out and overworked. But I guess because of the pandemic, quite a lot of it is changing. And I think realizing that the way we've been working and living and raising our kids are no longer really working.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I think the pandemic just exposed all the problems that we were eventually going to have to encounter anyway, and just kind of sped the whole process up.
Exactly.
Before we dive a little deeper into Niksen and what it is and what it is not, I think hearing the story of yourself and writing the article is so fascinating. Can you tell us again, like where this concept first came into your consciousness, when you decided to write about it, and how that turned into a book?
Yeah, so as a writer, I'm always looking for stories. And I think stories are everywhere. So I keep my eyes open. And the article I was talking about Niksen, the Dutch one, I think I found it. It was like a box from us, like a they call it a proof box, where you could get a box with all kinds of products from that supermarket, and it was like I guess it's the Dutch equivalent of Whole Foods. So like, supermarkets selling organic stuff, and there are all kinds of things in it. And one of those things was a magazine, and that magazine had an article called "Niksen is the New Mindfulness," and I was actually fascinated by it because, I was reading about mindfulness, how we all supposed to be more mindful, and we just losers if we can't. And then was just the word. I'm a linguist by education and passion, and I love that the Dutch had this one word to describe a concept that would need so many more words in other languages. And I thought, I have to write about it.
Wow. So it started out originally as an article for the New York Times. Is that correct?
Almost. So that was the second time I wrote about Niksen. Before that, I wrote a trend piece for a magazine. I think they folded now, or maybe not, called Woolly Magazine. And I wrote it as a trend piece. So, this is the new thing, and it's so much better than the Danish hygge because it doesn't require so much work. And so the feedback I got on that article was already very positive, and people were responding to it. And then I decided to pitch a similar idea, but this time a how-to article to the New York Times Smarter Living section. And it was accepted, and I wrote it. And then surprisingly, it went viral, and that's how I got noticed by a publisher.
Wow, that's amazing. What was the difference in the process between writing the article and writing the book itself?
Length, of course. First of all, the article was 1,200 words or so, and the book was 50,000. So that's already a very, very big difference. Wow. Well, I guess, and a book has, of course, a much bigger scope because it's just so much. It's just so much bigger than an article. In an article, you can only write. So that's why I wrote two articles: one a trend piece and one a how-to. But in a book, I could kind of write about so much more, and I had much more freedom to explore the topic from all kinds of angles, from a cultural angle. This is my life in the Netherlands, and how Niksen fits into Dutch culture, and what is it in the first place. And I was trying to understand what doing nothing means, because I found it much harder to define than I thought. And then I thought, okay, what about the people who say they cannot do nothing, and what maybe it's not always such a good idea. So I had all those kind of other angles to look at the topic.
I mean, in the book, you interview so many experts in the field. You must have done a tremendous amount of interviewing and research to prepare for that.
I have, but actually that's for me the most interesting part of the writing. I mean, I like the writing itself too, but having all those amazing experts and being able to talk to them, and they're giving their time and answering your questions is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's what I'm doing to you right now. It's great. So I would love to talk about Niksen itself. And you already mentioned defining Niksen. What I think an interesting way that you do it in the book is also talk about what isn't Niksen. And so for the reader, can you share with us, some examples of what Niksen could look like and a few things of what it's absolutely not?
So yeah, I did that because, as I said, I was struggling with defining Niksen. And okay, so doing nothing. Okay, So the definition I had was to do nothing without a purpose. So it's a twofold definition. The first part, to do nothing, which means you don't scroll Facebook or you don't watch a movie on Netflix. It's literally doing nothing, staring out of the window, looking at clouds. The other part of the definition is that it's without a purpose, because I thought there's so much that we do that we kind of forgotten how to do things just because. Or just because they're fun. So I always give this example of 10,000 steps, that we feel we have to make 10,000 steps every day. And we don't go outside because we feel like going outside. We go like, oh, I have to do my 10,000 steps. But where's the fun in that? Or we don't eat food because it tastes good. We eat food because it has magical qualities that will make us live forever or something, or that's what we kind of believe. And it's good. It's important to take care of our health, but it's also important to have some fun in life. so doing things or doing nothing just because it feels good, it's also quite important. And then I tried to understand, okay, so if doing nothing is there, gazing out of the window and gazing at clouds, then I realized, okay, but there's work that looks like doing nothing. And from looking from the outside, you wouldn't see the difference. But if you kind of looked into what the person is doing in their mind, you would see that there are things happening. So if, for example, I think in the book, I give this example of me sitting on my couch, which we just had bought then. So it featured heavily in the book. So if I'm sitting on the couch and I'm not thinking about anything in particular, then I'm doing nothing. But if I'm kind of, trying to find ideas for my article, or if I'm trying to kind of find a nice way to structure my article that I'm currently writing, that would be work for me because I'm a writer, and some of creative work is invisible and it looks just like doing nothing, except it's working, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, a friend of mine and I were just talking about this, and she asked, is walking considered doing nothing? Is that Niksen? And I said, well, it really depends. If it's, me preparing for a podcast and I'm listening to a book or a podcast at double the speed, that's not necessarily doing nothing. If you're just out for a stroll and you don't really have much of a goal, like you mentioned, like a step goal, that could definitely be considered Niksen, according to you. And is that right?
Yeah, well, I call it, like, even with things that aren't doing nothing, I call it the Niksen approach. So my brother told me, and that I thought really illustrated well. He said, look, if I'm going for a run because I'm training for a marathon, that's not Niksen. That's not the Niksen approach. But if I'm running because I feel like it and it feels good to move my body that way, that's the Niksen approach.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. I found an area of my house, which you recommend, finding like a nook or like an area that you can nix in all day. And I'm really glad that I found this little area, and it's right in front of a window. But I realized that I'm sitting on hardwood and I'm not making it very comfortable. Can you talk about why comfort is so important to the nix approach?
Simply because it feels good. I talked to a woman who really who really made it obvious how important it is, like the your environment, how important that is. And for example, if your mobile phone is always at arm's reach, then you're gonna grab, like you're gonna reach for it. If you put it away, then you wouldn't, because you don't see it and it's not calling out for you. The same way, if you we know the way we sit or work, the way we sit, for example, or what we have around our offices, it will influence the way we work. So why not? And for kids, we do lots of, like, we build kind of reading nooks for kids to read, to kind of hide from the world. And I think that's a good idea for adults as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what is Niksen actually doing for us? How can it be that doing nothing is actually doing something?
Yeah, so there are three areas, three types of benefits that we get from doing nothing. And one is productivity. And I keep saying that it's very obvious to us that we cannot physically work all day long. Our bodies need breaks, and our bodies need food and drink to function properly. And it's kind of understandable that we know this, but for somehow we don't think this applies to our brains. We kind of think we're supposed to think all day long, and thinking is also kind of work. It's just our brains get tired from that as well, and our brains need time to rest and to think about, to kind of consolidate everything that we have experienced, seen and heard and done that day. And also I noticed from my own experience that when I sit there and I'm tired and I've been sitting at my computer for hours, and suddenly I begin to write nonsense. If I would send this kind of piece of text to an editor, they would say, no, sorry, this makes no sense. But if I took a break and kind of went for a walk or for a bicycle ride, or just did nothing, or read a book, or did something unrelated to to this article, then I would take a break, and then I could come back to my computer, and I would write words that would make actual sense. So this way, Niksen is a bit like a break for the brain, and that makes us more productive.
When you do find that your writing is better when you come back after taking a break?
Yeah, simply because I have more clarity of what I want to write, and I'm no longer tired. So my the sentences make sense, and I don't make as many mistakes. Yeah, definitely.
You also talk a little bit about the role of guilt. Sometimes when we're doing nothing, we do feel guilty that we're not out accomplishing all those things that you talked about. Why do we feel guilt for just taking a little break like that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna for a moment, because I said there are 3 areas and I just said one, and the other one is creativity. So doing nothing makes us more creative, simply because our brains aren't focused, and then we have all our ideas, and it also makes us better decision makers. So those were the 3 areas. As for guilt, so the productivity expert Chris Bailey has a very interesting take on this. He said, yeah, you know what? We feel guilty when we do nothing because we value work and success and getting ahead in our lives and making progress. And that's important too. And he says guilt happens when we're not living in accordance with our values. And if we value work and success and all those things I mentioned before, we're going to feel guilty if we don't do those things. And we're going to feel like we're not making the most of our time. And he said, okay, let's reframe that, and let's value free time. Let's value leisure time. Let's value doing nothing. And if we start doing that and valuing those things, then we can stop feeling guilty, because the worst thing you can do is to tell someone, just don't feel guilty. That's not how it works.
Interesting. And I should have asked you to explain all 3 of the benefits. Can you explain the third benefit as well?
Yeah, the decision, the decision-making process. So, with decisions where you have an easy yes and no answer, this maybe wouldn't work. But let's say I think there was the Dutch sociologist Ab Dijksterhuis who did a study on very complex decision-making processes, and he gave participants list of apartments. So let's say, apartment B has A has a better location, but apartment B is bigger, and apartment C is maybe cheaper. And it's not an easy decision to make, because you have location, you have price, you have size, you have all those things that you want in a house or don't. And making a decision when you have like 4 apartments to choose from, it's very, very hard. So he had 3 groups, and one group was told to just write down the positives and negatives of every option. And then the next group, they were told to, I think, or he just had 2 groups. And the other group was told to kind of leave to read the list of the options the apartment had and then go do something totally different. For example, nothing. And he found that the people who did nothing or did something unrelated to the decision making, they were just happier with their choices.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I love how much research you included in the book. One of them, figuratively, was very shocking to me and was quite literally shocking to other people. Can you talk
Yes.
about that study? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Timothy Wilson's study showed interestingly that, people would rather give themselves electric shocks rather than sit still with their thoughts. It was just sitting there and doing nothing and having nothing to do or to entertain themselves with was just so unbearable that people would give themselves electric shocks out of boredom.
That's crazy.
I know.
That's crazy. That makes a lot of sense when you really sit down and think about it, though, because a lot of us just can't handle being bored, even for a few seconds.
Yeah, definitely. But actually, there was this other researcher whom I also interviewed who did studies on creativity and boredom, and she kind of brought people into this kind of room with no sensory input. So there was nothing, probably just a chair or something to sit on, and she let them sit there for a while. And after they came out, she gave them creativity tests, like tests to kind of figure out how creative they got. And she found that people who sit there in those sensory deprived rooms, they were more creative than people who kind of had something to entertain themselves.
Wow. Wow. That's really amazing. Tell us a little bit about how culture fits into this, because if you were to ask me what I see when I see, people from the Netherlands, I see them, 15 people deep on a climb in the Tour de France, all wearing orange and partying their faces off, orange smoke everywhere. Or if I just go down to the speed skating track that's just right down from my street, a quarter of the stadium is in orange, and they're going bananas over speed skating. Speed skaters from the Netherlands. I wouldn't think they would be much of a people to do nothing when they sure like to party a lot.
Well, so yeah, actually, so I was laughing about it because when I wrote my article for the New York Times, the one that went viral, Dutch people wrote to me and said, no, we don't do nothing. We're so busy. So I guess, but compared to many other cultures, Dutch people work less. They work fewer hours. They have more vacation time, which they also use. I've read that many Americans have vacation time, but they just don't use it. But Dutch people use the time that they have, and they kind of also are very protective about it. And there's this idea of being normal. So, for example, if you work long hours, but your colleagues don't, they will look at you like, "What you doing? Go home." Right? It wouldn't be good for you to work longer than necessary.
I've heard a saying, maybe you can tell me if this is true, that in America, we go on vacation so we can come back and work. And in Europe, you guys work so that you can then go on vacation. Those are two very different things. Is that true?
I'm quite familiar with Europe, but I've never been to the US. But it does sound similar to what I've been reading about the US. This kind of culture of overwork, I think it's taking over here as well, sadly.
People are working longer hours there as well?
Yeah.
Gotcha. You mentioned a lot of the other trends that are going on in, I guess like self-help, Hygge, tidying up and minimalism, concepts like effortless. What sets Niksen apart from all of those other things?
So I compared, if you look at trends like Hygge or Lagom or what was the Japanese? Oh, Ikigai. They seem to be very embedded into the culture they come from. So it's very hard to practice Hygge when you're not in Denmark. It's very hard to practice Ikigai when you're not Japanese or you're not in Japan. But when I actually looked at Niksen and expanded on it a bit, I found that it was actually pretty universal. So almost every culture, every language had something positive to say about leisure or doing nothing or laziness or so just resting. I was actually very surprised at that, how universal that was.
You use the word laziness, which I would say around here definitely has like a negative connotation. In the Netherlands, is there a negative connotation for Niksen?
Yes and no. So sometimes the Dutch would say Niksen is for niks, which means doing nothing is good for nothing. But they also say lekker Niksen, and lekker means delicious. So it's like delicious doing nothing. I think in English you say doing sweet, sweet nothing, which is kind of similar.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder how people judge other people that are doing nothing for nothing when actually they're getting all those wonderful benefits. I like the idea of sweet, sweet nothing so much better. Why isn't Niksen meditation? What are the differences between the two things?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I actually been thinking about it because when I wrote about meditation, I had in mind this kind of mindfulness meditation and how you kind of you prepare your room for it and your mind, and you maybe play some music or chants or something, and you clear your mind and you focus on your thoughts, but you don't kind of judge them. And that was my understanding from meditation. But then a friend told me, but you know what? I often sit in a cafe and just watch people walk by, and that's meditation to her. And so in the book, I kind of say, no, it's different, but there is a way for those two things to interact. And she's like, my friend, for my friend, just sitting at a cafe watching people's meditation, but for me, it would be Niksen. So I guess it's how you define it.
Yeah. Interesting. And for you personally, let's say you have an article to write, it's not due today, but it's on the horizon, it's something you need to work on. How do you decide when to work on that? Kind of more passive work versus practicing Niksen. How do you decide between the two when you have things to do that aren't necessarily like urgent?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I guess my day is very regulated by the fact that my kids go to school. Right. So there's a stretch of time that I have when they're not around. In that time, I try to kind of do my work and some other things for the house, and also go shopping and stuff like that. I think I try to kind of work until like lunch, and then I try to do other things. And if I have more work to do, then I work after lunch as well. But mostly I would do like my shopping after lunch. I wouldn't say it's like it's a decision. It just, okay, now I do this and now I do that. I'm really struggling to explain that because I don't see myself as a person who plans stuff.
So what kind of tips and tricks would you recommend for people if they wanted to try this and have more, Niksen in their life?
Yeah, so there are two ways depending on what kind of person you are, and if you're a person who likes scheduling things, why not schedule some Niksen time, right? So we always put the important meetings or doctor's appointments in our agenda, but we forget the breaks, which are also important. So why not schedule time for breaks? Or as some productivity experts do, leave blank spaces in your agenda, because we tend to kind of fill in every possible minute. But maybe don't do that and just leave spaces where you have, time between meetings to do whatever you want to do, or go for a walk or eat lunch. And the other way would be, so we are in a situation where we have to wait. So, for example, we're at the doctor's office, or we're waiting for the kids to come back from school, or we going somewhere on a train. And those are really great moments for Niksening as well. So because we have nowhere else to go, and we might leave through a magazine or scroll through a phone, but we could just as well do nothing.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned both of those things, scheduling time for it, but also in the book talking about, how to nix more at home or at work or when you're out and about. I think that's really important. I think a lot of people, now that they're going back to work in a workplace, could use more of this. How about when somebody's at the workplace, how can they fit more of this into their life as well?
Yeah, so there's tips in the books, and yeah. So I guess it's important to take breaks, and even if you kind of find yourself, like I mentioned with my articles, because lots of what we do as work is kind of intellectual, and our brains get tired. So it's important to kind of, if we realize that you kind of think straight, then you should walk away from your computer and go for a walk or eat something, or schedule some time at the gym or do whatever or do nothing, and then come back and come back to work with a fresher mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of research has been done on that where, somebody's trying to get a big project done all at once versus kind of chunking it down into smaller parts. You can be much more effective by doing the latter than you can the former. I'm curious to know.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know for you personally, have you noticed that Niksen is kind of seasonal? Does it change as the year goes on?
That's a very good question. I think we kind of we may do it. So I think there are two times that are really great for Niksen. I think one of them is like summertime, because that's the time, no, the kids are not at school and you're on vacation, or and it's also very hot, so you don't feel like doing much. And that's also, I think it's as a season really associated with, doing nothing and spending time and leisure and stuff like swimming or something. And then the other time is winter. That's why lots of those Scandinavian trends like hygge, it's connected to winter time, how you buy sweaters and make hot chocolate because it's cold and dark outside. And that's also a great time for doing nothing. I think it's also the time for like kind of, stories and stuff like that.
Can telling stories be Niksen as well?
I wouldn't say that, no, but it's kind of, I think it's something that people would do, like, it's winter and it's dark and people would kind of huddle together and tell each other stories by the fireside or something. That's what I kind of was imagining.
Gotcha. We took a deep dive into hygge last year, and it was really fun to learn about and listen to Mike Viking's work around that. Just very interesting concept. It definitely cost us a lot more in candles. Our candle budget had to go up last year, but it was nice. It was nice to give ourselves permission to be comfortable and cozy and snug. And when it's dark and cold outside, it's a great thing to think about. Every afternoon, my wife, when she's done with her day, afternoon kind of getting into evening and starting to get dark, she makes everything really dark in the house and calls it her cave, and she just like snuggles under a blanket, and it's really nice to see her give herself permission after a hard day's work. A lot of times when somebody writes about a certain thing, they get really myopic and they turn it into, a religion, and it's their way is the only way. You wrote an entire chapter that talked about when Niksen might not be the best thing, and also who it might not be recommended for, who it might not work for. And I thought that was really interesting and honest of you, being a proponent of Niksen, but also talking about when it's maybe not necessarily the best thing, or for whom it's not really recommended. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so I was inspired by, I didn't read so many wellness books, just a few to see how they were written. But as a mother, I read so many parenting books, and they all are like, okay, everything you know about parenting is crap, and we're gonna teach you the only possible way to raise kids, and if you can't do that, you're a loser. And I felt terrible, and I thought about my readers, how I wouldn't want them to feel this way. And so I wrote about chapter, okay, maybe it's not for you, which is fine. Here are some other things you can try. Or maybe it's not a good idea to do nothing in those cases. Right? Because there are certain moments where doing nothing is just not possible, or it's not a good idea.
What about for yourself personally? What's the hardest about Niksen for you to accomplish?
That's a good question.
I was
No, I
just,
wouldn't say
I was
Niksen
just
is
thinking,
very.
I was just thinking it was a bad question because I just said Niksen and accomplishing in the same sentence. That's total oxymoron.
No, that's fine. I think sometimes it's just very hard. You have moments where you kind of you have your work things and the kids need stuff and you have 10,000 appointments to take care of, and I'm not very good at planning, as I've said before. So it just takes so much energy to keep kind of track of what am I supposed to do when. And that's where kind of doing nothing becomes very hard. But then after a while, I notice it becomes almost a necessity because I'm just too tired. So I think in the book I wrote, no, I didn't write that in the book, but during homeschooling, when schools were closed because of the pandemic, I actually did a lot of nothing in the evening because I just couldn't get out of the couch. I was so tired. So that was kind of forced Niksen a bit.
Yeah, I feel bad for parents who had to go through that. All of their free time just kind of suddenly being kind of taken away and spending so much time on Zoom with their kids. That's a real challenge. As you've been, sharing this message with the world about Niksen, what's been the most rewarding part of being able to talk about this and share this message?
Just telling people, hey, there's this cool thing and that I just read about and I thought about a lot and asked very smart people about, and okay, this is what I've learned and maybe it's going to be interesting to you too.
And you're an author who writes about all kinds of different topics. Is there anything you're working on currently for the future?
Maybe a parenting book. So that's something I wanted to do for a while and I hope it will work out.
That's great. I hope it's in the style that you mentioned, where you're going to tell everybody to parent exactly this certain way. No, that's a really good point. I love that. What about stories?
Yeah, maybe not.
Maybe not.
I mean, there's so many books like that. Yeah.
Gotcha. I think it's cool. I think it's cool that you get inspiration from so many different areas and you're always, kind of attentive, and maybe you're practicing Nix, but you are always attentive for the new, inspiration for some new writing. I think that's really smart of you.
Yeah, well, I'm just, I used to have a blog. I don't anymore. So the European Mama blog is kind of, I shut it down a while ago. But the thing about blogging was I loved it, but then everyone was telling me, no, you have to pick a niche and stick to it and just write about, multilingual kids. And I'm someone who gets bored quite quickly. So I didn't want to just write about multilingual kids. And that's why also I started pitching my ideas to magazines and publications, simply because I was interested in so many different things that I just didn't want to stick to one topic. And it's very rewarding to me to kind of learn new things and to ask more people about it. And it's pretty cool that I have an idea and get to talk to someone and oh, actually, I haven't thought about this way. And that's super rewarding.
I love that. Do you have any favorite stories, people that have written you messages or shared how Niksen has benefited them in their lives?
Well, I have a Facebook group where people share a lot of such messages. It's very, very, very cool, and I really appreciate it.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I wanted to talk about the Nikseneers. How did you come up with that name? That's a great name.
Well, I was thinking about how to call someone who does nothing. And I thought of the Three Musketeers, and then I came up with Nikseneers.
I love it. It is, of which I am one, by the way. I'm on your group, and I absolutely love it. I love how active you are on there. I mean, you're not just sitting back and allowing a group to, have their own thing. You're getting involved and answering questions. It's one of the kindest and most supportive groups that I've ever been a part of on social media. Why was that important for you to create?
To be honest, at first I thought, oh, I have to promote this book, so maybe I need a Facebook group. But it's turned really into something so great and amazing. And as you said, the people are so kind and friendly, and I'm really happy because
That's great. Yeah, the people are so good-natured and, like I said, very, very supportive of your work and supportive of each other. And for mess that social media generally is, I really appreciate that you created that and you allowed the group to kind of learn and get support on the page. And it's free for anybody to join. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
That's awesome. And what other ways do you connect with people?
Through Facebook mostly. So I have a Facebook page, Olga Mecking, writer, journalist, translator, and Twitter as well, although I'm not as active there as I should be probably, and Instagram. Like I'm probably on all social media imaginable. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, you're off doing nothing more than you are playing on social media. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. If you had one simple tip that you would like to leave with the listener, what would that one thing be?
That's always the hardest question to answer, to be honest. I think I would like people to kind of try it and see if it works for them. If it works, wonderful, and if it not, it's okay. Like if it's okay, maybe it's just not for you. It's fine. You're not a terrible person because you cannot do nothing. Or if it's hard, it's just hard sometimes. So I think that's mostly what I want people to take away from this conversation.
I love that. And it's also something that needs to be practiced a little bit. I mean, the first time I tried, it was like 1 minute. And that 1 minute consisted of 4 seconds of Niksen and 56 seconds of me playing on my phone. Like it takes a bit of time.
Yeah. It does. If you're not used to it, then it does.
Well, I, for one, really appreciate your work and appreciate your message. I think it's a really awesome thing to be thinking about in our so busy lives, and we're just pushing and grinding all the time, especially over here. It's just, it's so much work. And I love that you're bringing this concept to the table as an option of you can slow down and you can do nothing. Olga Mecking, can you tell the listener one more time where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, sure. So there's my book, which is Niksen, Embracing the Dutch Art of Doing Nothing, which is available on Amazon and everywhere books are sold. And then also you can find me on social media, mostly on Facebook. My page is Olga Mecking, writer, journalist, translator, and of course the Niksen News Group.
That's awesome. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Olga, thank you so very much for all of your work. Thank you for putting this message down on a paper and in formats that people can understand it. The article is amazing. The book is fantastic. I can't recommend it highly enough. So thank you so much for your work and for taking the time to put it out there and for taking the time to appear on our show today. We really appreciate it.
No, I really love being here, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
It was fun.
It was an absolute honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.